The tension was palpable in the Oval Office as President Donald Trump leaned over the resolute desk, eyes narrowing as he read through the latest reports on the Democrats' latest smear campaign against him. His hand slammed onto the desk, a powerful, definitive gesture that silenced the room. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning in the background, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. "Enough is enough," Trump muttered, his voice laced with frustration. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room as he formulated his next move. The midterm elections were looming, and his administration was under constant attack. It was time for a strategy that would turn the tables, and he knew exactly who to turn to. "Pam," he called out to his chief of staff, Pam Bondi, who had been standing quietly in the corner, watching him with a mixture of respect and understanding. "I need you to execute something big. Something so massive that it'll send a shockwave through Washington." Pam stood at attention, her eyes sharp, ready for the challenge. She had been a stalwart ally to Trump, known for her razor-sharp legal mind and her ability to cut through red tape like a hot knife through butter. She had faced down plenty of political firestorms, but this was something else entirely. "I'm listening, Mr. President," she replied, her voice calm yet charged with intensity. Trump turned to her, his expression hardening. "You're going to put the DOJ on full alert," he said, his voice growing colder. "I want you to launch an investigation into the Democrats. Everything. Their finances, their ties to foreign powers, their shady dealings, every damn thing. We hit them with a move so big, so public, that they won't know what hit them." Pam raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She knew that any move they made would be under intense scrutiny, and if it failed, it could backfire spectacularly. But Trump had always been the kind of leader who played high-stakes games, and she had no doubt that this was going to be one for the history books. "Do you think they'll fight back?" she asked. Trump's lips curled into a small, confident smile. "Of course. But that's what we want. We want them panicking. We want them scrambling, making mistakes. And when they do, we'll be there to expose them for the world to see." Pam nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the task before her. She wasn't just going to go after the Democrats, she was about to ignite a political war, one that could change the course of the election, and perhaps, history itself. "Consider it done, Mr. President," she said, her voice unwavering. As she turned to leave the room, Trump's voice stopped her. "And Pam," he called, his tone now unusually serious. "Make sure it's massive. This isn't just about winning an election, it's about sending a message that no one crosses me without consequences." Pam didn't look back, but she understood the message loud and clear. It was time to go to war. The next morning, Pam Bondi sat at her desk, the weight of the president's command settling in. She had been briefed on the details, the timing, and the stakes, all of which were monumental. But even someone as seasoned as she was, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. This was no ordinary investigation. Trump's order had set into motion a chain of events that could send shockwaves throughout the political landscape. Pam's phone rang. It was Mark, a senior strategist from the White House. "Pam, I'm getting word that the Democrats are already starting to circle the wagons," Mark said, his voice urgent. "They know something's coming. You need to move fast." "I'm on it," Pam replied. "But we need to make sure this isn't just a standard investigation. It has to be unprecedented, something the media can't ignore, something that forces them into a corner." As Pam ended the call, she glanced at the thick stack of dossiers on her desk. Each file contained a different scandal, a potential lead into the shadowy dealings of various Democratic figures. It was a treasure trove of ammunition, but it had to be carefully managed. One wrong move, and it could blow up in their faces. She pulled open the first folder, a report detailing massive campaign donations from foreign interests. It wasn't illegal, but it was certainly suspicious. The next file contained evidence of backroom deals with tech companies that had provided support to Democratic candidates in exchange for political favors. But the most shocking file of all was the one that detailed illegal lobbying by a major Democratic donor, a shadowy figure known only as the architect. It was the kind of smoking gun that could bring the entire Democratic Party to its knees if it were handled properly. Pam's mind raced. The investigation had to be thorough, and it had to be relentless. She needed the full weight of the Department of Justice behind her, not just the resources, but the political will to see it through. This wouldn't be just a courtroom battle, it would be a political and media war of unprecedented proportions. She knew she couldn't do it alone. She called in her closest allies at the DOJ, Special Prosecutor James Alexander, who had a reputation for being ruthless, and FBI Director Linda Harper, who had experience handling sensitive political investigations. As the three of them gathered in the conference room, Pam laid out the plan. "We're not just launching an investigation," she said, her voice firm. "We're going to make a public spectacle of it. We need the press involved from the very beginning. I want every piece of evidence released to the media, but only in small, calculated doses. We'll drip-feed it to them, just like they've done to Trump for years. And once they start to panic, we hit them with the big stuff." James raised an eyebrow. "And the big stuff?" Pam's eyes gleamed with cold determination. "The architect. If we can link him directly to the top Democrats, the entire narrative changes. This isn't just about bad decisions, it's about corruption at the highest levels." Linda, always the cautious one, hesitated. "Are you sure we're ready for this? If we go after someone this powerful, they won't go down without a fight. The media will tear us apart if we're not careful." Pam's lips twisted into a tight smile. "We've already been through worse. We need to turn the tables, to put them on the defensive. Once we start, there's no going back. But when we come out swinging, they'll be the ones scrambling." The room fell silent as the gravity of the plan settled over them. Pam wasn't just talking about an investigation, she was talking about a political strategy that could change the course of the upcoming elections. The Democrats would be forced to react, and in doing so, they would expose their own vulnerabilities. It was time to make them panic. It was just past dawn when Pam Bondi and her team gathered at the Department of Justice headquarters, preparing for the first phase of what would be the most high-stakes political investigation in recent history. The plan was set, the groundwork laid. All that was left was execution. Pam stood before a giant whiteboard covered in names, dates, and timelines. The architect, the mysterious and powerful figure behind a web of political donations, backroom deals, and international influence, was at the center of it all. Their task was clear: find the connection between him and the most powerful Democrats, then make it public, fast. Pam's fingers hovered over the whiteboard as she mapped out the next moves. Her team was already in motion. FBI agents were preparing to seize confidential records from one of the key Democrat-aligned PACs, while DOJ prosecutors were gearing up for interviews with witnesses who had previously been hesitant to come forward. Everything would be coordinated to hit with a level of force that would have the media scrambling to keep up. Pam looked up as James Alexander entered the room. His face was grim, but there was a fire in his eyes. He had always been a man of action, and today was no different. "We're ready," James said, his voice low and steady. Pam gave him a curt nod. "Let's do it." The first target, the foreign campaign donations. It wasn't enough to rely solely on documents and testimonies, they needed hard evidence, the kind that would be undeniable. Pam had already made arrangements for the media to be tipped off, but only at the perfect moment. She didn't want to give them too much, too soon. As they coordinated with the agents in the field, Pam's phone buzzed. It was a text message from Mark at the White House. "They're already reacting. The Democrats are circling. The media is on high alert." Pam smirked. They were already starting to feel the heat. Within hours, news outlets began reporting on the DOJ's sudden investigation into foreign donations to Democrat-aligned PACs. The story was everywhere. Headlines blared from every major network. DOJ investigates foreign donations to Democratic PACs, Red 1. DOJ takes aim at top Democratic donors, investigation into foreign ties, Red another. The press, as expected, was in full swing. But Pam knew this was just the opening salvo. The real fight was coming. As the investigation picked up momentum, so did the panic within the Democratic Party. Key figures began to distance themselves, making desperate calls to their legal teams. Their talking points were simple: deny, deflect, and discredit the investigation. But it wasn't enough. They were already being backed into a corner. Pam and her team moved to the next phase, the big reveal. The architect. They had traced financial contributions from various shell companies directly to one of the most influential Democratic super PACs. Through careful, patient work, they had uncovered that the architect was more than just a wealthy donor. He had direct ties to a number of powerful figures in the party. He wasn't just influencing politics, he was controlling them. Pam's eyes gleamed as she watched the news coverage of the latest development. The Democrats were rattled. They were trying to hold their ground, but it was clear they were losing the battle for the narrative. "This is it," Pam said to James and Linda, who had gathered around her desk. "Once we go public with the architect's full connection to the party, it's over. They won't be able to spin this. We'll have them on the ropes." Linda, ever cautious, was still concerned. "But what if they turn this back on us? We've seen how quickly they can change the story, even when the facts are on our side." Pam's lips curled into a confident smile. "Let them. We're ready. We've got everything they don't. And this time, the public will see exactly what's been going on behind the scenes." The moment had come. It was time for the final push. The press conference was set. The entire political world was waiting, holding its collective breath, knowing that Pam Bondi's investigation was about to explode in ways no one could have anticipated. The build-up had been meticulous, the groundwork laid with precision. Now, it was time to reveal the final piece of the puzzle, the architect. Pam stood backstage in the DOJ press room, watching as reporters took their seats. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just another press briefing, this was the moment that could alter the political landscape forever. She glanced at her watch. The clock was ticking down. James and Linda stood by her side, their faces grim, but there was a sense of determination in their eyes. They knew what was at stake, they had planned this for weeks. Everything had been carefully orchestrated. Now, it was out of their hands. Pam took a deep breath, steadying herself before stepping out into the spotlight. The cameras flashed as she walked to the podium, the sound of clicking shutters filling the air. "Good afternoon," Pam began, her voice calm but firm. "Today, the Department of Justice is announcing the results of a comprehensive investigation into the Democratic Party's ties to foreign influence. We have uncovered a network of donations and financial transactions that not only violate campaign laws but also raise serious concerns about the integrity of our democracy." The reporters exchanged nervous glances, sensing that this was no ordinary investigation. The tension in the room was palpable. At the heart of this investigation is a figure who has remained in the shadows, someone who has manipulated the system for years, pulling strings behind the scenes to influence elections and sway political decisions, Pam continued. This individual is known only as the architect. And today, we are revealing his true identity. The room fell silent. Pam could feel the weight of the moment. She clicked a button on the podium, and the giant screen behind her flickered to life. A photo of a middle-aged man appeared on the screen, a well-dressed, unassuming figure with a calm expression. It was an image of the architect, a man whose name had been whispered in political circles for years but never publicly confirmed. Now, his face was out in the open for the entire world to see. This man, Gregory Wellesley, Pam announced, has been at the center of a vast web of illegal political donations, laundering money through foreign entities to fund Democrat-aligned super PACs. His influence has stretched across state lines and reached into the highest levels of government. His network has provided millions of dollars to Democratic candidates, all while evading the scrutiny of the public eye. A gasp rippled through the room. The name Gregory Wellesley meant nothing to the public, but to the political elite, it was a bombshell. This was no mere donor, this was a mastermind who had been hiding in plain sight. Pam paused for a moment, letting the gravity of the revelation settle in. She could already hear the murmurs and whispers in the room. The media was digesting the information, frantically scribbling notes, and preparing their questions. Mr. Wellesley's connections to the Democratic Party are undeniable, Pam continued, her voice growing more resolute. We have evidence linking him to several top Democratic figures, including representatives, senators, and key campaign officials. His influence has shaped policy decisions and election outcomes, and his financial contributions have altered the course of American democracy. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, demanding answers, but Pam held up her hand, silencing them. She wasn't finished. In addition to his financial dealings, we have uncovered that Wellesley has been in direct contact with foreign governments, offering them influence in exchange for support during critical elections. This is not just a violation of campaign laws, this is a breach of national security. We cannot, and will not, tolerate this kind of manipulation. Pam's words hung in the air as the room buzzed with disbelief. The Democrats were reeling, and now, the public was about to watch their every move. They had nowhere to hide. As the press conference ended, Pam made her way back to her office, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. She had just ignited a firestorm, one that would consume the entire Democratic Party. The architect was exposed, the connections laid bare, and the nation was watching. But Pam knew this was only the beginning. The Democrats would strike back, they would try to discredit the investigation, deny everything, and spin their own narrative. But for now, they were on the defensive, and she had the upper hand. As she sat down in her office, staring at the swirling chaos outside her window, Pam allowed herself a small, victorious smile. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, it felt like the tide was finally turning in her favor. It didn't take long for the Democrats to respond. Within hours of Pam's explosive press conference, a flurry of public statements flooded the media. Democratic leaders appeared on every news network, issuing denials, questioning the validity of the investigation, and painting Pam as part of a partisan witch hunt. Their narrative was clear, this was just another attempt to distract the public from Trump's failures. But Pam had anticipated this. She wasn't naive enough to believe the Democrats would roll over and accept defeat. No, they would fight back with everything they had. But now, they were on the defensive, and that was exactly where she wanted them. The first counterattack came from Senator Daniel Pierce, a seasoned politician with a reputation for smooth-talking his way out of tight situations. He held a press conference that very evening, flanked by a group of his allies. What Pam Bondi and the DOJ have done today is nothing short of a political smear campaign, Pierce said, his voice rising with righteous indignation. The investigation into Mr. Gregory Wellesley is based on flimsy evidence and partisan motivations. This is not about upholding the law, it's about attacking political opponents. The DOJ has become a tool of the Trump administration, and we will not stand for it. The media latched onto his statement immediately. Piercing critiques of the DOJ's actions began to spread like wildfire across every network, while pundits on the left eagerly picked apart every detail of Pam's announcement, calling it nothing more than a distraction to deflect attention from the Trump administration's own failings. Pam watched the backlash unfold on her TV screen, her expression unchanged. She wasn't surprised, she had expected this kind of pushback. What she hadn't expected was how quickly it would escalate. Within hours, anonymous leaks began surfacing, claiming that the evidence against Wellesley was fabricated. An insider had allegedly come forward, saying that the DOJ had doctored documents and falsified information to target key political donors who supported Democratic candidates. The rumors spread like wildfire, feeding into the Democrats' narrative that this was all a political hit job. The pressure mounted. The media began to question Pam's credibility. Were the accusations against Wellesley legitimate, or had the DOJ been compromised by political motivations? The Democrats were framing the investigation as a cover-up, not just of corruption, but of government overreach and manipulation. Pam was unfazed. She knew that this was exactly what the Democrats wanted, to shift the focus from Wellesley's ties to foreign powers to the legitimacy of the investigation itself. They needed the public to believe that Pam was playing dirty. But she had her own plan for countering their counterattack. The next day, Pam called a press conference of her own. She wasn't going to sit back and let the Democrats control the narrative. It was time for another revelation, one that would hit them even harder. "Good afternoon," Pam began, standing confidently at the podium. "I'm here to address the recent claims made by some of my political opponents. I've seen the allegations that the Department of Justice has falsified evidence, that this investigation is nothing more than a politically motivated attack. Let me be clear, these allegations are not only false, but they are an insult to the men and women of the Department of Justice who have worked tirelessly to uncover the truth." The reporters were watching her closely. They could sense she wasn't here just to defend herself, she was preparing for another bombshell. "We have received new, verified evidence that proves Mr. Gregory Wellesley's connections to foreign governments and illegal political donations," Pam continued. "Not only that, but we've also uncovered a direct link between his donations and the manipulation of election outcomes. This evidence comes from multiple independent sources, sources with no ties to the Trump administration. And we will release it in full to the public." The room erupted in questions, but Pam held up her hand, silencing them. "I know the Democrats want to deflect, to focus on distractions. But this is about the truth. This is about protecting the integrity of our elections and our democracy. The facts speak for themselves. We are not intimidated by political threats. We will continue this investigation, and we will see it through to the end." She knew this would stir up even more controversy. But she also knew that the Democrats were running out of time. The public was beginning to grow restless. The constant denials and accusations of a cover-up were starting to wear thin. They were looking for answers, and Pam had them. As she walked off the stage, she could already feel the ripple effect. The next few days would be crucial. She had just reignited the firestorm, and now, it was time to see if the Democrats could survive it. But Pam wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The hours after Pam's press conference were a blur. News outlets were ablaze with her bold statements, and the public was buzzing. Pam had successfully flipped the script, the Democrats were no longer on the offensive. Now, they were scrambling to respond. But this time, they couldn't just brush it off as a partisan attack. The evidence Pam had alluded to was undeniable, and the public wanted to see it. By the following morning, the DOJ's press office had released a series of documents that would shake Washington to its core. Pam had carefully orchestrated the release of these files, knowing full well the weight they carried. The documents were a roadmap to the heart of the scandal. They linked Gregory Wellesley to multiple foreign governments, each one playing a role in funneling illegal contributions into Democratic campaigns, all while manipulating elections to secure political influence. The evidence didn't just implicate Wellesley, it implicated some of the most powerful Democratic figures in the country. It didn't take long for the media to pounce. The documents were everywhere. Political analysts were combing through the data, confirming the connections, and drawing comparisons to previous instances of foreign interference. It was clear, this was bigger than anyone had imagined. The Democrats' carefully constructed narrative of denial was beginning to fall apart under the weight of Pam's revelations. The counterattack came swiftly. Democratic leaders were on every channel, pushing back harder than ever. But this time, they were fighting an uphill battle. The questions weren't about the legitimacy of the investigation anymore, they were about how deep the corruption went. Senator Pierce, once so confident in his dismissal of the investigation, now appeared flustered during a live TV interview. "These are old documents," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "There's no smoking gun. This is all fabricated. Political theater." But the damage had already been done. Even as Pierce attempted to rally his base, the rest of the country was beginning to see the cracks in the armor. The public wasn't buying the narrative anymore. They wanted answers, and they wanted them now. Back in Washington, the pressure was mounting. Pam's phone rang incessantly. Journalists, lawmakers, even foreign diplomats were calling. The Democrats had been put on the defensive, but they were still a formidable foe. They had their own operatives working overtime to undermine Pam's credibility, to cast doubt on the evidence. The attacks were intensifying, and the truth was becoming harder to separate from the chaos. Pam wasn't worried, though. She had expected this. The game wasn't over yet, and she had one more card to play. She called in her closest allies, James, Linda, and a select group of prosecutors from the DOJ who had been working on the case since the very beginning. She needed them to prepare for the final push. "We've hit them hard, but they're not going down without a fight," Pam said, her voice low and determined. "We need to prepare for a public hearing. A hearing that will bring everything into the light. The Democrats will try to bury this. They'll try to discredit us, but this will be our chance to expose it all, the full extent of the corruption. We'll do it publicly, and we'll do it in a way that even they can't ignore." James nodded, already working the logistics. "We'll need the full support of the media. If we can get them on our side, the Democrats will have nowhere to hide." Linda, still cautious as ever, voiced her concern. "A public hearing is risky. If we don't have every piece of evidence lined up perfectly, it could backfire. We can't afford to give them any openings." Pam met her gaze, her expression unwavering. "We've done the work. We have everything we need. And I'm not backing down now." The decision was made. The DOJ would push forward with a public hearing, the first step toward unveiling the complete truth behind the foreign influence operation and the corrupt dealings of Wellesley and his Democratic allies. The hearing would be broadcast live, watched by millions across the country. This was the moment they had all been working for. The stage was set for a confrontation that could determine the fate of the 2024 election. As the team finalized the preparations, Pam couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. This wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about making a statement. The Democrats had controlled the narrative for far too long. It was time for a new chapter. When the day of the hearing arrived, the room was packed. Television cameras lined the walls, capturing every moment. Lawmakers, staff, and journalists filled the seats. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The spotlight was now on Pam, and she knew that the eyes of the entire nation were on her. She stood at the podium, her team at her back, as the committee chair called the hearing to order. This was it, the moment everything would either come crashing down or be cemented as the political showdown of the decade. And Pam Bondi was ready to take the fight to them. The room fell silent as Pam Bondi stepped up to the witness stand, her gaze unwavering as she prepared to deliver the knockout punch. The hearing was a spectacle, a televised political showdown with all the drama of a courtroom thriller. Every major news outlet had its cameras trained on her, every reporter in Washington hung on her every word. Pam had one shot. One opportunity to make her case before the nation. There was no turning back. As she adjusted the microphone, she could see the opposing Democratic committee members squirming. Senator Pierce, the same one who had once scoffed at the investigation, sat at the front with a tight-lipped expression, his hands clenched into fists. He knew this was the moment that could decide everything, his career, the future of his party, and possibly the election itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pam began, her voice steady and commanding. "We are here today to discuss corruption on a scale that this country has never seen before. It is not just a matter of campaign finance violations. It is not just about political donations. This is about the integrity of our democracy, the manipulation of our elections by foreign powers, and the erosion of the trust that the American people place in their leaders." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The room was silent, everyone waiting for her to continue. Over the past few weeks, we have presented evidence, irrefutable evidence, showing the illegal financial networks controlled by Gregory Wellesley. This is the man known only as the architect, the mastermind behind a campaign to funnel foreign money into the pockets of top Democratic operatives. His efforts have influenced elections, shaped policy decisions, and corrupted our political process. Pam's eyes scanned the room. She could see the members of the Democratic Party trying to maintain their composure, but their faces betrayed them. They knew what was coming. This was the moment they had been dreading. Today, I present the final piece of evidence, she continued, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. A recording, obtained legally through multiple sources, in which Gregory Wellesley directly discusses his manipulation of political campaigns with high-ranking Democratic officials. This conversation was recorded just weeks before the 2022 midterms, and it reveals the depth of foreign influence in our elections. A hush fell over the room. Pam nodded to her team, and the audio clip began to play through the speakers. The voices were clear, the first was Wellesley's, and the second was unmistakably that of Senator Pierce, the man who had so fervently denounced the investigation. In the recording, Wellesley's calm, measured voice was heard discussing how they had coordinated foreign donations to funnel into key battleground states. The goal, as discussed, was simple: to sway election results and ensure a Democratic majority in Congress. The recording continued, and as Pierce's voice came through, the tension in the room ratcheted up. "We can't let them win this," Pierce's voice said. "We've invested too much. We have to make sure the funding flows through. We need this election to go our way." As the tape played, Pam watched the faces of the Democrats, particularly Pierce, as the damning words filled the room. There was no denying it. There was no escaping it. The man who had condemned her investigation was now exposed as a key player in the conspiracy she had uncovered. The room erupted into chaos as the recording ended. Reporters scrambled for their phones, broadcasting the audio clip live. The Democrats on the committee were stunned, their carefully crafted defenses completely obliterated. Pam stood tall, her gaze never leaving the stunned faces of the opposition. "This," she said coldly, "is what we've been up against. This is what the American people have been forced to endure in silence. Foreign interference, campaign manipulation, and the corruption of their democracy. But today, we will not let them hide any longer." The final blow had landed. In the days that followed, the fallout was immediate and devastating. Public trust in the Democratic Party plummeted as the audio recording spread like wildfire. Voters demanded answers, and the media began to focus on the depths of the corruption within the party. Democratic leaders scrambled to distance themselves from Pierce and Wellesley, but the damage had been done. The narrative had shifted, and they were on the defensive. Senator Pierce, once a rising star in the party, faced an avalanche of calls for his resignation. The pressure mounted until, just days later, he was forced to step down in disgrace. The investigation continued, with more names being uncovered, more ties to foreign influence coming to light. But the turning point had been Pam Bondi's final revelation. She had exposed the corruption, and in doing so, she had rewritten the rules of the political game. As Pam walked out of the Capitol building after the hearing, the weight of the victory settled in. The battle wasn't over, but she had won the war. The Democrats had been forced to reckon with their actions, and the American public had seen the truth, not through the lens of partisan politics, but through the evidence she had carefully compiled and presented. And as the cameras flashed and reporters swarmed, Pam allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had done what she came to do. She had changed the course of the election. And in that moment, she knew she had done something far greater, she had restored a measure of faith in the system, a victory for the truth. The political landscape had been reshaped. And the name Pam Bondi would be remembered for years to come as the woman who brought down an empire of corruption.